Within today's podcast, there will be a guided mindfulness meditation.
Welcome
Please
everyone
do
to
not
our
drive
episode 3
or operate
of
any
Sitting
heavy
With.
machinery whilst listening to this
Our
part of the podcast.
topic today is
Sadness.
which is it's almost like I was thinking this morning about this, as in, how do you introduce sadness? And then there was a part of me like going to make fun of it, as in, because that's where it needs sometimes. There's not making fun of, but as in just a more renewing emotion of glad or happy or peace that you can hold it sometimes.
Yeah.
Even like I'm noticing how we're very like
different, aren't we?
calm.
Oh, calm. I feel like I'm a swell and massive contradictions, me. Absolutely, like, because I don't feel calm today. Got a lot going on. Especially, I'm sitting with a lot of sadness.
Yeah.
And humour is brilliant, isn't it? And as I was laughing about something this morning, as I was feeling sad, there's that what's been said to me a lot, and others get this. Oh, it's a defence mechanism. Well, if I didn't have it, I'd go insane.
Yeah.
So it's looking
a good
at
defence, isn't it?
Yeah. I think one of the things I was really conscious of is that if there's any triggering words from today's session, you know, we're sitting with this end of sadness, aren't we? Not the depressive end and the very serious.
Yeah.
Not that sadness is not serious. So a bit of a disclaimer, if there's trigger words, if there's things that are just not sitting right with people as they're listening to this, we're going to do it in a fun way, aren't we, as well? Light-hearted seriousness as well to it. So there's always the NHS 111 if you're feeling that there's a lot going on and you need to speak to someone.
Yeah.
Take pauses, like listen to it in chunks, or just take some time
or
out.
even just start it. Almost like, I suppose, if people are listening to it, is whether it's in the car, whether they're at home or through their AirPods on a walk, if it is triggering, because I think I do get a sense that this conversation will be sad.
Yeah, and I can feel avoidance in my tummy already by going, lighten it up, because I've been sick before you arrived, saying lots of silly things, being quite jokey, and then I said to you, oh, there's loads of self-esteem, things being said, and I was like, that's a sign that sadness is around. And I'm not listening to that crap, because it pulls you under, doesn't it? But yeah, I think I'm like even wanting to avoid the subject of it.
Yeah.
Isn't that mad? It's what we do. It's a very British thing, isn't it? I'm not saying it's always cultural.
Yeah, I was thinking about that this morning, as in, like, so many angles of sadness, isn't there? As in, there's the internal world of sadness, then it's how you should behave with sadness, or how you should act with sadness in society, or you look at like different cultures, how, you know, when you think of sadness, you think of loss straight away.
Of course, absolutely. Well, it is, isn't it?
And you know how different cultures express sadness. You know, African cultures still have the wailing in funerals, where British culture is very reserved, isn't it, and conservative approach to sadness, as in we don't somatically express the sadness as much as different cultures would.
Absolutely.
So there's so many different angles that you could sit with sadness from. But I think a lot of people, including myself in the past, have not honoured the somatic side of sadness. As in, you can talk, we're intellectualising sadness. This is the cognitive side we're talking about, aren't we? This is the cognitive intellect side of sadness, but
because it's a felt thing, isn't it?
Sadness is a felt, somatic,
it's a
embodied experience, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where weirdly sometimes talking about it can be a bypassing of it.
Yeah, you're avoiding it. You're in your head. We're both there now, aren't we? We're like, I'm in avoidance in my body, but going to my head.
Yeah.
Might be useful to look at like the range of emotions as well, just to gently look at those. I was having a look at stuff over the weekend, and I'm thinking, what is an emotion? I was like, this is my life's work, and I'm like, someone asked me, I was like, I couldn't give anyone. I'm like, the sort of how you're feeling, the complete feelings and emotions are radically different. Yeah. So from the core, like emotions, you've got sadness, happiness, anger. You know, I've got them listed there. Fear, disgust, surprise.
Sexual, which is a big emotion, isn't it?
Yeah.
And how much does sexual feelings come into sadness?
Could do, couldn't it?
Come into sadness. That's a bit of humour that's coming in there.
Yeah.
Coming in there.
And then the next one's what they've found as well is there's trust and anticipation. So we've got to trust this process, see where it goes. We say that a lot in mindfulness, don't we?
Yeah, yeah.
As we bring it back to mindfulness. So they're the core emotions, and the quick and the rapid. So we either approach something or we come away from. Sadness, I feel, more often than not, is like a retreat, isn't it? So I went to a funeral, sadly lost my cousin Craig about, I think it's 5 or 6 weeks ago. And the funeral I didn't want to go to, people. I was like, no, come on, you're a grown-ass man now. So there's that sense of just checking in to see how other people are and their response. And my response was like, I wanted to retreat into my own sadness. So trying to check in with others with theirs, and I'm like, oh my word, it's painful, isn't it? I think the sadness, as I'm feeling it, it's choking me up right now.
Yeah.
I feel like I can't speak. And that's the feelings of it, isn't it? I think when you've got the emotion and it's very quick, it's very rapid, and we're generally unaware of it. And then emotions are more immediate, but the feelings, how we interpret that stuff. So that's where we landed, isn't it? We're landing with our interpretation of what sadness might be. And I'm not saying don't do that, but for me, you might be more of a thinker in your process. I'm more of a feeler. I have to go into the body. I'm not saying you don't do that. I reside more here. And then sometimes I have to switch my thinking on to like, hang on a sec, that didn't quite happen. Or, so the feeling that's around for me is sadness. It's hurting my tummy. It feels like my throat's being squashed. The avoidance is subtly leaving, but I can feel like my face getting ready to cry, even though I'm not going to cry. So it's I don't want to sit with it. I don't want to.
We don't want to, do we?
No.
It's
horrible.
It's almost like these, if you think of it as sensations too, like you hurting, like scrunching or squeezing. These are all sensations in the body, aren't they, that are trying to, almost like digestion, I suppose. If you look at the now thinking from a total biological perspective, when the body digests something and the intestines go to work and they start to squeeze stuff out and then you excrete. Is sadness, like from a biological perspective, when we're feeling, because all the sensations are squeezing, aren't they, or tense or clenching or blockage or heavy. They're all like a movement of some sort. Is sadness, although sometimes it is a retreating, as in to go inward, is it also a moving emotion that's trying to digest something to then excrete it?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. So that for you, what you're describing in the not what to call it, in your body, philosophical thinking. I wrote it down on there, I can't remember the name of it. Where you're processing something through your biological system.
Oh.
It'll come to us. It's a word,
Yeah.
So when you're processing it through the body, that's because I can't, see what I mean? I'm in my body. I can feel it, and as you're talking, I'm like, oh my God, you're just describing what I'm feeling. One thing I often do is just ask myself, not in a weird way, just keep it really basic and don't be all woo-woo about it. What does this part of my body need? Is it tense to speak, to verbalize, to make sense? What does my throat need? It's trying to be very cautious that I don't go into too much detail.
Yeah.
Brené Brown is a brilliant author, and she looks at shame, and she's a shame researcher, and she says, are we talking about ourselves rather than talking about the topic? So there's this saying she has. What's the saying? Sharing or speaking about ourselves. So I'm very conscious this is going to say too much. It's going to let out too much, to be too much detail. It'll be like, Christ, we didn't want to check in and hear all that. So I'm muddled, my whole head's muddled up, my body's muddled, and that's what sadness sometimes do. I feel like the secondary emotion to sad right now where I'm sitting with is like confused. I was so clear when I arrived.
Yeah.
What it does to you, it muddles your brain, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And it's like, I suppose, hearing that from because you're living it at the moment, aren't you? You're living that sadness through the loss, and it does almost confuse it muddies the waters, doesn't it? Sadness for a little while. We enter into that soil of sadness where we don't know where it's going. There's no clarity there, isn't there? Kind of weirdly, if you think of it then from how that inner world of thoughts, feelings, sensations then affects the biological body, then it is that squashing,
Yeah.
almost the blocking of the big brain, isn't it, to think clearly. And
So to open now, physiological.
yeah,
Isn't that mad? The words just come in.
Yeah, just a very simple word. Have you ever forgot words such as how to spell and?
Just when you just
weird?
get that blockage of stuff, you're like, what's going on?
Yeah, weird blockages, and
Yeah.
you think, where do they come from? Where do these blocks come from? I heard a while back. I'm digressing. But when you think of a word, you know, the tip of the tongue thing, where you think of a word and you can't verbalize it, then there's a bit of the brain. The more you try to think of it, there's a part of the brain that's actually closing off for you to have access to that word. And as soon as you forget about it, then that opens up, and then you get access to the information again.
Leave it be.
Yeah. I'm going to acknowledge something. It's feeling sad, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Feels heavy, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. I'm thinking also, sorry to interrupt you, my Auntie Heather died recently, and she was beautifully brutal, if I describe her. She was a one-off. And I know a lot of people say that, but completely, radically different to any other human being that you'd ever meet, ever. So fearfully, just said her own words, said what she was thinking, didn't hold back. And it's making me laugh, because as she's in, I can hear her going, you daft, get up your edges. I can hear, and the other things I wouldn't even be able to say because of her. She was hilarious. So different people, how you can experience loss. So where there is a different sense as well, because it feels heavy on one side, but then I've also got the humour. As I'm connecting to my body and feeling it, my throat's now opening back up, because my mind's saying, you're sharing without talking about yourself. That's what Brené Brown says, sharing without talking about yourself.
Yeah.
So I feel a bit lighter. I can even feel the energy change in the room. So I've processed a little bit, and I guess that's what we're trying to do with sadness, isn't it? Let a little bit in. Process a little bit. Aaron Beck, who developed cognitive behavioural therapy, said we should sit with sadness. I guess the kids would call it a pity party now. But set your alarm, set your clock. No longer, you don't want to be sat for hours and hours in it, because it can just lead on to other things. So in mindfulness, we sit with, don't we? The very purpose of this podcast, sitting with it. And I'm wondering if right now it might be nice to just do a very short sitting with, as I sit with this stuff and describe my experience live for listeners. Probably about, I don't know, maybe do about 5 minutes. So people want to skip or do other things they can. But I'm just changing our posture, just getting comfortable, giving yourself 5, because I think it just really helped me and demonstrate how we sit with sadness. So just sensing the shift in the body, the posture away from how we were sat previous. And this is an opportunity just to notice other people at work, other people living their lives, as the distractions might come into the room. Just acknowledging that. And then if you choose, really coming away from all the intellectual words, the conversation, and resting with the body in this moment. Often sadness may need some grounding, so you might choose to rest the focus of attention on the soles of the feet. Maybe you'd like to become aware of the sitting bones, sitting on a chair, a stool, a cushion, if that's where you've decided to rest right now. Really sensing the uplift of the spine right up to the shoulders. And if you decide, being really curious as to where the hands rest right now. if you'd like to bring a little playfulness to the sitting, just check in to see the differences between the left hand and the right hand. One may feel warmer than the other. There may be more tingling in one hand, or they may be just the same. It may be particularly wise and helpful to bring the focus of attention to the breath right now. Gently allowing the breath to flow into the body, calmly turn and flow back out. Gently turn and flow back in. If you feel like you've got enough resilience to sit with a minuscule piece of the sadness today, just gently acknowledging that sadness might be in the room, in the space, in the body, but just being really gentle, taking real good care. It might be gently acknowledging where sadness might pull in the body or move, perhaps the tummy or the head. There's an option to gently scan the body from the head down to the feet in your own time, and just checking in to see gently how sadness is being felt in this moment, if it is being felt. You may wish to stabilize the body from the feet, wherever they're resting right now. Perhaps the bottom, wherever the bottom is sitting or standing. Maybe the hands. And then again, if you decide, having a little peek at how sadness feels, feeling sadness from the inside out. And by that I mean feeling the body from the inside out, how sadness may reside right now. An option to take a few deeper breaths into the body and take the breath out longer than it was taken in. And then calmly and gently moving away from the experience of sadness, and that move to one side, if you're able to do so, without overthinking it. Coming back to sounds in your space, might be sounds of my voice, sounds from the room itself, sounds from the world outside, even sounds from your own body. And then as the practice slowly comes to an end, just opening the eyes if they've been closed in your own time. Checking back in with the space, shapes, colours. Thank you very much.
Nice.
Now I know the last time I moved just straight into talking, and then you wanted to share, and that's something we always do in mindfulness, isn't it? We always do what's called an inquiry.
Yeah.
You might choose to share, however brief, however short, or you might just want to go back to what we were doing previous.
It's also maybe inviting our listeners to, like, because most people don't listen to a podcast straight off the belt. They don't listen to it as in a fluid 60 minutes of listening or watching. It's usually in small chunks. And, is this an opportunity for people to pause or to come back to it later on and just reflect on that meditation? Reflect on that time of sitting with the sensations in the body, whatever came up.
Yeah, love that.
And then I suppose, now that everyone's come back to it,
don't do it while driving, by the way. I forgot to say
back,
that.
Everyone. If you've come back to it a day later, then you're in the future now.
Here's happiness.
And probably. I love to inquire into my experiences, and as you were doing that very calm introspection of mainly the body, wasn't it? It was mainly kind of sitting with the sensations and the emotions arising, whatever they were. There was this noticing of where sadness, I wasn't feeling sad, as in presently sad, but there was a reflection on sadness, as in where sadness, the history of my own sadness, as in previous losses, with losses of loved ones, losses of careers, losses of things, situations, beings, you know what I mean? So there was a lot of reflection on sadness, and sometimes that can bring up past sadness, can't it? As in a longing for, if there isn't any present, and doing a practice like that, as in just allowing, if there is any sadness, and if it's not brought up by current external factors such as loss or grief, then really tuning into that is then another part of you coming up to be heard, whether it's a past version or whether it's, or even intergenerational stuff or projected or introjected stuff from previous times in your life, and which never got heard in at that time, and you've give it space to go, hello, do you want to come up and we can have a cuddle?
Yeah.
Do you know what
Wasn't that lovely? Have a cuddle with sadness, because
Yeah.
that's kind of what I do with something else. So my wife girlfriend died 20 years ago, Janice, I'll say her name, so it's not, she's not just a non-person. And I can do that now. I can go, I can't always look at photographs and things. I think that it takes the sadness where then I sometimes can't get on with my day. It knocks my function out. And I think that's where it's useful. These practices are helpful on this end of the spectrum with sadness with a small s, if you like. Yeah. That you're not then your ego's got enough defense not to unravel, not to feel bloody awful. But it's also useful to highlight when sadness is more persistent. So with depression, it's around 2 weeks, isn't it? I've had depression twice as a result of grief that just didn't get processed properly, and that's what happens a lot, isn't it? So what we do in here, the work and our work outside of this as well as psychotherapy and mindfulness, is to help process in smaller chunks, not to avoid, you're not doing it to stop depression, but it can be super helpful. So mindfulness, coming back to the purpose of it, it can help do mini processes. What did you say? Have a cuddle with sadness, which I think is just gorgeous. But then if people are listening to this with more depressive elements, that's different again, isn't it? That's another approach completely. I'm not saying you can't do this stuff, but it comes after doing psychotherapy or other work outside of that. But it's just sitting with it. It's the one emotion, because it is loss, isn't it? And loss can be grief. It feels helpless. It feels hopeless. I remember reading the terms about depression, and the reason that can't always change, or you can't get yourself out of it, because the future feels futile or dangerous. In my sense, it was like, what's the point of getting well? I have to go back to work and it's all overwhelming. I have to work with people who are sad. And I remember Janice saying to me, but everyone's problem's a problem, and that's what really resonates from that loss. So it can be profound, it can be very straightforward, can't it? But as I sat with it now, I feel in a radically different headspace. Sitting, being with it, it wants acknowledgement, doesn't it? But loss it's so painful, it's so glum.
It's the raw I would like if you and I'm thinking profound now, as I usually do. If I was to think from the perspective of that raw sensation of sadness, what usually is it? What's the sensation of raw, unadulterated sadness?
Oh, it's horrible. So in the physiological,
crushing, isn't
that's
it? It's crushing.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm interrupting you.
And it's like, if we think about the first time the body felt a crushing, when was that?
I don't know, is that when you're born or something?
Born?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like this, I suppose if you're thinking from a perspective of baby in womb being held, all of this, all of these soothing sounds, these primal, almost the ocean going in and out, isn't it, of the all of that, and then suddenly the baby gets crushed through this small hole, and then they're separate from a pure raw. I'm not thinking from a cognitive. That's not even online as a newborn, is it? Or even the emotions are not even online. It's pure raw sensation of a crushing sensation. You know, if you think of that first ever time when we were crushed, that's fucking brutal, isn't it? That is just absolutely a brutal time for the symbiotic, interconnected relationship between mother and baby being separated, as in, I've lost my environment. I've lost this warm, loving, floating place, and now I'm in this heavy place of gravity. Do you know what I mean? As in, you just float, don't you, as a baby in the womb, and then suddenly you're brought out into this heavy world where it's cold. You know, cold is almost the, link that word cold to isolation. It's all interlinked, isn't it? And you think, this primal crushing sensation, and then the mother brings baby to the chest to reconnect with the dudum, dudum, but from a different place. It's that reconnection with, I'm feeling crushed, isolated, sad, and then what needs to hold that is the soothing sounds of the mother, whatever that looks like. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense.
And we can replicate that, can't we? If we're aware of that process and feeling the sensation is a crushing, what does the crushing sensation need?
Because do you know? I remember it really well. Because I read something. It was called, I think it was a book called Circles. So like when we're crushed, we're bent over. We're overgrounded. We're like pushed into the earth, aren't we?
Yeah.
So when we get silly and giddy as we do, another podcast will be more like that again. There's like, we're ungrounded, we're springing away from. So for me, when we're getting crushed, sometimes in my work, people need to feel it. They need to be in it.
Yeah.
Especially from the severe end of like severe and enduring depression. It needs to be spoken about. We need to be there's nothing wrong with you being in your head, obviously. But I need to get people to stop intellectualizing or ruminating.
Yeah.
And by ruminating, it's just endless worry, looping around, trying to find a problem of how to get out of depression. Well, you're not going to think your way out of it in that moment. It needs often to be felt, doesn't it? But in small chunks, as we've done. That can help people. But I remember it as you're talking. I don't remember my birth, obviously, but I mean the crushing feeling. And then there is birth, but then there's also other links, isn't there? So you've got people being trapped in lifts or people who are claustrophobic. Just the body will remember what that feeling feels like. It's oppressive, isn't it?
Yeah.
It changes thinking. It changes like our physiological response. So the threat center, the amygdala, which is sort of the alarm, are thinking loss as we retreat. something's going on, isn't it? It's like,
Yeah.
I don't want to feel this stuff. But in naming it to tame it, to come to the feelings of sadness in a steady, continuous way. Once you've done plenty of practices, you can sit with more and more stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that makes you better or worse. We're always coming back at it in beginner's mind. It's, for me, a very, very useful way of just shaving a slice off all the time. Because I think the major piece of my work at the moment, including my own grief, and which I can manage and contain really well, because I have to. Lots of my clients are experiencing very profound, complicated grief, which is sadness, isn't it? Most people don't want to feel it. They're going into their heads. They're doing lots of other things that are unhelpful. Lots of avoidance, which I did the same. I'm not judging people for where they're at.
But isn't that, I suppose, the avoidance? Our from one angle, the avoidance is unhealthy defense, but is it also a healthy defense simultaneously at the same time?
It would unravel.
You would, wouldn't you? You would literally, you'd decompose, wouldn't you? Yeah. Your entire system would decompose if you allow an emotion such as sadness to take hold fully. Then it's quicksand.
Yeah,
it's a quicksand emotion.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it doesn't need that much to be fully immersed in that. You're surrendering to the dissolving of your entire self.
Yeah, which can happen, can't it?
Hmm?
I've done a couple of sessions this week.
In it.
Yeah, a couple of sessions this week, and I think how mindfulness has helped radically shift. There's a thing called transference. So for people who don't know that, it's very straightforward. Someone transfers their feelings, whatever they are, onto you. So if they're done with pressure, it's called projection, isn't it? You can feel it quite powerful. And it happens sometimes. People aren't doing it on purpose. It's just a part of what we sit with. So you can have it in mindfulness, you can have it in psychotherapy. Then I might counter-transfer and go, I'll just tell you tons of stuff about my family, and like, they don't need to hear. Some might need it to be normalised, so I'm only telling them a small amount. So there was 2 sessions of transference, very powerful, sad transference, and it hit my stomach. They weren't pushing it into me. Then my voice was going, normalise it, say something. I was like, no, I'll let the person sit with this. What mindfulness has allowed me to do is see all them nuances. And I know other people can do this without needing to meditate. So that then I don't counter-transfer. Because in the last podcast, I was counter-transferring a lot onto you. You were telling me something, then I was psychoanalyzing it, and you were like, oh my God. So I paused earlier and I was like, don't do that. If we need to do it, of course we can do it with lightness.
Yeah, we'll get playful with it, because we know each other from that perspective.
But it allows you to see this interplay with your own. So emotions come in, they're unconscious. Then I have feelings. So the feelings are my interpretation of what's just happened. And we can also feel it with each other, because we're intuitive beings. This is like, the world is emotional, isn't it?
Yeah.
We think about it later. We make sense of it as well through our thoughts and the body and the mind. So for me, it's took me to a different place that I can then shift and understand when someone does need to have a bit of normalisation, otherwise they'd unravel. Or whether something in my head says, shut the F up and let this person make sense of their own sadness. This room is a very sad room, but people leave. Someone once said to me, do you get paid to listen to people's sadness? I went, I get paid for when they walk out, that they feel happy. Yeah. The process
in here.
The process of it. But we are, like you've mentioned, we've got avoidance, which there's healthy avoidance, isn't there? We've got a repetition, that there's a gain sometimes from staying. I know I had that gain. So in the practices, what we're trying to help people with is noticing when we're caught in loops, like you might need to go and speak to somebody else, or you might need to speak to a therapist or a friend or a mate. But it really is, from everything I've witnessed with 2 experiences of grief from others, how we're all dealing with it in radically different ways. We were all trying to then chase happy, or we should be feeling a certain way. Sadness communicates from me to you that I need something. Please help me. But the confusion thing is I'm retreating at the same time. So we can often give unintentionally mixed messages, can't we?
Yeah. And you're right, I suppose, having spaces for the sadness to be held or heard. Because if that's when depression or absolute isolation does kick in. Because if a person either hasn't got an external source of a safe space or a safe person or a safe situation for it to be held, then it enters into despair.
Absolutely.
As in, there's nothing. And if you haven't got an inner world of safety, which a lot of people don't do they? They don't have that subtle inner world of, well, if I'm not getting it from the outside world through friends, situations, community, if I have it inside, then at least I'm connecting with more of a subtler community. But most people don't have that. They don't have the subtle.
We're not taught it, are we?
No, we're not taught of the inner family.
It's all avoid, do
Yeah.
something else.
Yeah.
You know.
It's everything's external, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think if we were to move to how sadness is interpreted in culture, then one, we're two men. How have we been? How has culture taught us as men to be with, sit with, process, act around sadness?
It's weak, isn't it? To sit and feel it. So most men, in my experience, come into the room and it's through anger. They'll express their depression through, or their sadness rather, in both contexts, through anger. Do you remember the feeling tones? And you taught the feeling tones in mindfulness, and some of our listeners will know what they mean. Fancy term Vedana, and I love the term, but feeling tone for me is just very straightforward. And it's either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Right at the start of this, it was deeply unpleasant to sit. I was like, I don't want to do this today. I was like, I hope the camera goes off or the lights go out and I can cancel.
Yeah.
Then it became neutral, and then pleasant. And it's right now it feels pleasant to have spoken about it, because I've sort of gone through the waves of it, and that's in a small way. I'm functioning. I'm at work and I'm all right and things. But what's really helpful is in any moment to simply come to the breath. Let the breath out, and as the breath leaves, just to acknowledge. You can do this in a practice, can't you?
Yeah.
Pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Sadness, for me, I have to do, I don't know, 90% of my sessions something else, and 10% sad, depressive work. What really helps me and helps others is the cognitive triad in cognitive therapy. So self, how we see ourselves. Well, I'm hopeless, I'm useless, I'm worthless. Basically, they think that depression is self-esteem. It's just been shot to shit, hasn't it? So then the world's probably dangerous, it's futile, it's, you know, and how we see others, they're not really going to help me, they're just talking through their own stuff. All people have different thoughts. So that's one of the reasons we develop that, because the sadness sits for longer, doesn't it? It pulls out some of them cognitive things. So the Vedana, the feeling tone, helps us see, is that thought particularly helpful right now? You don't have to overanalyze and interpret it, but for me, it gives me perspective. I can get balance. So the meditations, the feeling tone, it's unpleasant. And then lots of those. There was lots of self-esteem thoughts were coming up right at the start that previously I'd have gone into and believed. And I'm not saying some of that stuff's not there. It's helpful to work through. But I think sitting with it, just being with it, it's got its own journey, hasn't it?
It's healthy to have that healthy distance, isn't it? It's like, you know, go too close to the sun, you're going to get burned. But if you're at the right distance, it's going to nourish you. And is that the same with any emotion? As in, if you're at the right distance of what that emotion is either teaching you or allowing you to be with, or whether it's just being with it because it needs to be there. If you're too close to it, then is it going to burn? Or if you're too close to it, is it going to isolate? Because I suppose the right distance with any emotion is, if you're too close, if you keep going into sadness, going back to the quicksand analogy, then you're going to get lost in it.
And like you said,
you're going to get you're going to get too immersed and wrapped,
pulled you in, doesn't it?
Into sadness.
Yeah.
Where if you have that witness, that observer effect through mindfulness, as in, let's, you know, a mindfulness technique, if people are new to it, is eventually creating that part of the mind that comes online as in the observer, as in, you know, we all feel sadness, which is subjective, it's in us, but then mindfulness allows us to bring another part online, as in the witness or the observer. So then the subject inside of you, the heaviness in the heart, the sadness, you can then witness as an object.
Get some distance.
You get some distance from it and go, that's an interest. That then curiosity can kind of come in and be helpful to, there it is. This isn't me. This is a process that's happening within a bigger situation, whether that's from a body perspective, a cultural or external perspective. So many different angles to view it from, isn't there?
Absolutely.
But once you've got that online, then I always use the example to people, going off the subject of sadness onto stress. Sat in a traffic jam, and you have to be somewhere, and you know you're going to be late. How do you feel? You're feeling, your body's wired, you're worried about what's going to happen if you get there late, blah, blah, blah. So you're immersed in the experience of the traffic jam. Now, same situation, and there's a lovely hill just outside the motorway, and there's a lovely bench and a little kind of coffee cabin where they sell fresh donuts and freshly made coffee. And you're sitting on that bench, same situation, you're looking down on that traffic jam. How do you feel? You're feeling quite curious, aren't you, or calm or relaxed, as in, well, I wouldn't like to be in that today, or and these type of thoughts would come in rather than, I need to be this place. My boss is I'm gonna get in trouble or whatever. All from getting distance, and there's sometimes using that analogy in the mind, as in, we can get in the traffic jam of sadness, and it can be just. Imagine being in a traffic jam in New York, where everyone's and all the noise, and it's like there's no sense to make.
Yeah.
There's no room in the mind, is there, to make sense of anything. Where if you're in a helicopter going over, it's such a lovely sight to see all that traffic, because it's a beautiful scenery.
Perspective, isn't it? Yeah.
So it is kind of, I suppose, the whole mindful sitting with something, a new version of yourself kind of comes online, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Getting that observer effect, which gives you so much more distance in it, and other emotions come in to help.
Brilliant.
Come in to give you a cuddle or a hold in the situation.
And to do that, what's fundamental is the anchors, isn't it? So whether that's just it's too much sadness, back to the soles of your feet.
Yeah.
And it might feel quite minimal, and it really, really isn't. Back to my bum in the chair.
Yeah.
So as I was getting the transference from the person, I was like, right, just feel your feet, notice there's an urge. You can see all of the things just in more detail. So from the emotion being activated, which is unconscious predominantly, to the feeling coming in, to the sensations, the distancing and the noticing as you're seeing. But you can't do that without being anchored. Yeah. And sometimes sadness needs more. We build
definitely.
up that you don't do sadness till the end of your 8-week course in mindfulness-based cognitive therapy or mindfulness-based stress reduction, because it's like going into the gym, isn't it, and going, I'm just going to lift all these weights, which there's a gladiator in our gym, believe it or not, and he just chucks stuff around. I mean, I'd love to lift where he lifts, but he has done some work, and it's that type of mentality, isn't it? Starting off with the low weights, put them down. When the body needs a rest, to get to this place, the more that you do it, to get this distance in. And that's in cognitive therapy as well. Robert Lee, he does it a lot, where he says, go up to the balcony and look down, and what's happening, what's missing from this story, get a 360 view, can really help, especially when we're feeling sadness, because the world gets distorted. Or what some people are saying, we're actually seeing the world really as it is. They say that sadness is actually how reality really is. And then once we're all right again, we put our rose tinted glasses on. That's just a throwaway and bit of fun that people often say with it, just a bit of lightheartedness. So I think even having talked about it now, my stomach's, the knots lessened. I've got a bit of distance. I've got a bit of perspective. I've processed a little bit, just enough. It's like all these shots that are really in, these health shots. I'm just taking one of them, just enough. Not being superficial or glib to sadness, Because I think what I used to do a lot was then, oh my God, I've got to make a joke, and we haven't done it. It's not really interesting.
yeah,
People
it
don't
is.
see this side of me, and they don't need to. I don't particularly care what side people see, but that I can sit with things now rather than having to make silly jokes or comments or.
I think we wouldn't be honouring sad if we're. I think the whole point of this podcast is a demonstration of how to sit with emotions, sensations, topics, different things. And if we didn't demonstrate that fully and honour it, then all what we would be demonstrating is how to bypass things, because we are very our humour is very dark, stupid. That could easily come in here right now into this space and make fun of sadness. Sadness doesn't need to be made fun of, does it?
No.
So it's
serious, isn't it? It's serious without being all stuffy about it.
It needs to be honoured on that level.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it's deep friend humour can only come in a little bit now and then. It's like making when your child is upset, then the first thing you don't do is bring humour in. You bring the holding in, you bring the it's going to be all right. It's all the soothing, the grounding, all that comes in first, doesn't it? And then once the sadness starts to dissipate, then humour comes back in. Should we go and play a game or whatever it is, or making a silly joke, and then the child laughs. It's that, isn't it? It's knowing when to use humour, because it can be overused.
Yeah.
And if it overused, you just look like a dickhead. You look like a prick. Because if someone's really sad, you're not attuned to them, and you're trying to make a joke before they've moved through the holding parts of sadness. As it needs to be held, it needs to be grounded, it needs to be been with.
Absolutely.
Then humour comes in onto the stage and goes, well, let's have a bit of a laugh now. And then sadness gets up and goes, yay. Well, he doesn't, because he's sad.
Yeah.
But then it moves into that, doesn't it? Transforms into that in the natural process, rather than trying to. So much bypassing going on in the world, isn't there?
I feel really attuned to you now, as you mentioned, an attunement. So it's that simple connection to connection, isn't it? So we have neurons, brain cells, and as you're speaking or the other person's speaking, we fire the same, don't we? So the mirror neurons fire information back and forward, don't we? We read stuff. I remember training with sadness and training with depression, and I've worked with it for a long time, to then go, oh, I can't be with this. Or to give too much energy, too much cheerleading, over hope. We need, sadness needs hope. You know, that things out. And that's one of the things fundamentally that I'll say to all of my clients or the people that I'm working with. This will shift. Not everything's a fixed state. And you can feel it, can't you, when someone is sad. We just sometimes, when you're attuned to it, like, oh. I don't mean miserable, because there is people around who they're not sad, they're just miserable. And they bring everything back, they're very pessimistic. I don't mean that version of how someone is.
And they've just wired themselves that way over a long period of time, haven't they?
Which is fine. That's how them individuals are. We often just duck in out the way, because pure sadness I don't mind sitting with when you're attuned to that, and I don't mind sitting to it in the room. But remembering that as well, keeping some of your own energy back, not being like cold to it, although it's someone's process. You can't over egg that process, can you? You have to let people be in there.
And even not holding it for them.
Absolutely.
As in just be in the space where it is holding itself. Yeah. As in it's coming up and it's then digesting itself into something else.
Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it?
So I'm just looking at the time and.
Yeah, like I suppose we've gone round the houses, haven't we, with regards to sadness, the internal world, the felt sense experience of sadness, some of the cultural aspects, which I don't know whether this needs a further exploration. Do you know what I mean? As in episode 2 of sadness, not in the next one, but maybe kind of coming back to sadness, because.
I'd like to do. I was thinking this morning, like sitting with depression.
Yeah.
So is that? I mean, that you'd need to do maybe in 2 half-hour slots, because I mean, that would be,
Yeah.
it's a heavy subject, isn't it, for people? But yeah, you're right, there's a lot more.
There's a lot to unpack within
In
every
it.
emotion, isn't there? Because it's not, I always see it as, some people will see it from one perspective, as in, this sadness is caused by this, which is an absolute type thinking, as in it's black and white thinking, or where if you then get the helicopter effect and seeing the interconnected wires of why that sadness is arising, then all of the other things around that sadness is arising at the same time. As in, society's sadness is arising because we're entering into a new domain of how we're all living. We're coming into the winter. We're almost leaving the winter period of the seasons of culture. As in, everyone's feeling that at the moment, aren't they? That's co-rising. The sun is going through its later stages of its solar cycle, as in the solar flares. That's coming to an end, which is sadness. You know, the planets are aligning. There's new things coming and going every single layer of existence. So if you then see that there's a co-rising of everything at the same time, no wonder people feel sad, because it's not directly caused by one absolute thing. It's caused by so many things, and
It's multifaceted, isn't it?
I do find that when you start to have conversations, as in, this is not your fault, as in, this wasn't just caused by that, and helping someone expand the mind to, oh yeah, this wasn't my fault, or it wasn't my father's fault because he had all of his stuff going on, and he was brought up in World War II, and they had a rough time, and you know, that solar flares on the sun are coming out, and that must affect us all humans on the planet. If you then start to see the big picture of how we're all small cogs that are constantly being turned, then I think compassion kind of comes into the situation.
Oh, definitely.
As in,
compassion with a big C.
There's no wonder that sadness needs to come in, because it's a natural allowing feeling for the next feeling to arise once the sadness gets heard.
Natural, I love that. Yeah. And depression as well isn't a weakness. It's, they say that people who've been depressed are overcopers. They do too much to cope with the sadness or the experience. So sadness goes out. It's like the computer. Too many files are open and it shuts down.
Have you ever heard of Jim Carrey's version of depressed?
Oh no.
His version is, it's deep rest from being the self, as in the conditioned self that we all play the roles of society. And when people enter into depression, it's deep rest to get back to the true self.
And no one will rest, will they?
No.
Including me. Trying to
Just
prescribe rest in sadness or depression. People are like, no, I'm like, so you get like an over rest of it, don't you? But rest, I mean, we might do sitting with rest next time. I don't know, whatever comes up. As we like close, I feel happy to have sat with sadness today.
Yeah, it does feel. I feel peaceful sitting with it. As in, you know, if you look at them two emotions that we've experienced, happy and peace. You know, you look at them two emotions; they're holding emotions, aren't they? They can hold big spaces, massive spaces. And
to close as well, what's really useful is that these 6 emotions and the 8 with the 2 added on aren't finite, they're massive, aren't they? Even sadness has got a million different versions in itself. It's not just this and then it does that. It's you know, there's a million ways. They're more profound than how they're described. They have to be described simple so we understand them.
You could infinitely discuss them.
Yeah. Oh, the light's gone off.
What good timing.
Yeah.
And on that note,
even the lights.
As the lights.
As the lights. Oh, just as we end, I've been dying to tell you this. Do you know the energy in the centre of the sun? How long does it take to get to the top of the sun? It takes 100,000 years. And then it takes 8 minutes for it to hit your head. So basically, let's just take our time sitting with things.
Exactly, because the sun
isn't
takes
that off
its,
it?
yeah, the sun takes its time.
Yeah.
There's no rush.
Yeah.
Just be with it wherever it is.
I've been trying to get that in. I don't know why. It's not normal, is it? I mean, we should cheer up so I can say this thing about the sun.
Get the sun in, because Alan mentioned the sun earlier, so we need to get some facts in about science and
He's
stuff.
laughter again, isn't he?
And then, now it's
light
coming
relief.
naturally.
Light relief.
On that note,
Oi,
see you
oi.
all next time.